Boker Tov, good morning, and welcome once again to Monday Morning Musings, an opportunity for us to begin our week in a spiritual, reflective, important way to set a tone for the rest of our week, get us through these times, remind ourselves of how connected we are and how much we're in this together truly, and really a kickstart to what we want to be doing, not just this week, but hopefully every week to build upon each other. And today I'm joined by a very good friend of mine, Pastor Kenneth Flowers. And Pastor is the Reverend of Greater New Mount Moriah Church in Missionary Church in Detroit. We have worked together for really since the day I got to town. I think we
Yes.
started our journey together. We've traveled together to Washington, D.C. To advocate for different important causes on many sides of our world, right? Whether it's in civil rights issues as well
Yes.
as for the relationship with America and Israel with AIPAC. And really is someone who not just speaks truth, but follows it with his actions all of the time. And so I thought he'd be a wonderful person to teach, to share with us today in honor of Martin Luther King Day. So first of all, happy Martin Luther King Day to you, right? I'm thrilled that we get to spend a little bit of it together.
Yes. Happy King Day, my friend and my brother. To all of you who are here watching today, your rabbi, my friend, my brother from another mother, Rabbi Michael Moskowitz. He is truly someone that is very special and dear to my heart. And I have to say this without making him blush. You all are very blessed and fortunate to have someone like Mike who is leading you as your rabbi. We don't find a lot of people today who are committed and dedicated and devoted to build bridges across racial lines, across religious lines, across ethnic barriers. And Michael Moskowitz is someone who is the real deal. And so I'm just honored and thankful to God that we can share this space together as friends and as brothers. And I wouldn't be any other place but with my friend and my brother on this King Day, especially for such a time as this, in light of all what has happened in the last couple of weeks. So we'll talk about that in just a moment.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Thank you. You're very kind, and I appreciate that. I'm glad that we're partners in this. You teach me all the time, and
Yes.
truth be told, I do log on to your services, especially in the midst of the pandemic when I'm not teaching at the length on Sunday mornings, and I have some time to check out church and enjoy uh, often your messages as well.
Thank,
So
thank you.
I'd love for you to share with us what this day, this holiday means to you, both as a Black man, as a pastor in a Black church too, as a leader in the Black community, and its importance for you.
Well, God has blessed me. You know my history. I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, 1979 to 1983. It was there that I met Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife, and she adopted me as one of her sons, one of her spiritual sons. And Mrs. King and I, we shared a very, very close bond together. And for me, I remember marching and speaking at the King Day celebrations. It wasn't King Day, then it was just his
Right.
birthday. And every year, Mrs. King would ask me to speak. The very first time I spoke was at the Georgia State Capitol. We had marched from Ebenezer Baptist Church, January 15th, 1980. And I was a freshman. I was just 18 years old. And Mrs. King had me to speak on the steps of the Georgia State Capitol. Over 5,000, 7,000 people there. We'd march, and we were marching in order to make Dr. King's birthday a national holiday. And I felt like Dr. King was speaking through me as I spoke that morning, and thousands of people there. It was by far the most folk I'd spoken to in my life. And yet God set Dr. King's spirit in me, and his voice came through me. From that point on, I marched every year with Mrs. King to make sure his birthday became a national holiday. So in 1986, when it finally became a national holiday and Ronald Reagan signed
Mhm.
the law, I was elated because I felt that some of my work in Atlanta, marching, speaking, demonstrating, protesting, writing letters, had helped bring about this day. And so it was personal for me because of my relationship and my connection with Mrs. King and the King family, and having marched each King Day with Mrs. King and the King family to bring this about, even as a teenager. And that's why I tell young people, I don't care how young you are. I was 18 years old, and Mrs. King used me to be a part of this movement. So I tell young folk all along, always get involved. So as a Black man in America, I'm honored to have had a part in this, but I'm also honored to remember someone who stood for freedom, justice, equality, liberation, nonviolence, and used the principle of love as his governing force. Dr. King was about love and peace and justice, not just for Black folk, but for everyone, the Jewish community, the poor whites in Appalachia, Black folk. He was for all of us. So for me, it is a day to reflect, to meditate, but also a day to do some things to remember what he stood for and to help somebody along the way.
Love it. You know, you often have spoken about your relationship with Mrs. King and the power and how that lifted you up. And I
Yes,
always appreciate that because we forget how close we are to history as well. Like
yes,
sometimes people, our generation as well, in our 50s, right? I mean, I was a toddler when Dr. King was
yeah,
murdered, right? So I only know of him in history and the power of that and of what we need to be doing. But it's really just yesterday, right?
yes,
The civil
yes,
rights movement of the 60s and how important that is to recognize, and recognizing that it was, not long, only 18 years after he was assassinated, that it became a holiday. We
yes,
wish it had been earlier in 86. That being said, we still have the challenge. As it's
yeah,
made a holiday, what do
yeah,
Alabama and Mississippi do and other southern states? They declare it a holiday for Robert E. Lee, whose birthday is around the same time, I think January 19th.
yeah,
And some states, I think Alabama still does that, right? They
right.
dilute the significance of Dr. King's holiday, of this day for us.
It is sad, and I'm glad you mentioned that. 'Cause I was just sharing with my wife. We normally set the trash out on Mondays, and we noticed last night that people have set the trash out. And I said, but tomorrow's a holiday. And so this morning when I got up, I said, I wonder if I need to set my trash out because I'm not sure if the sanitation workers here in Farmington Hills, where I live, uh, if they're going to pick up the trash. I said, I can't remember because what you just stated. I know there's some communities and there are some unions will tell you you can pick which holiday you want. I mean, there's certain days you have to have. They say, well, in terms of Dr. King or Veterans Day, you can pick whatever one you want. And I can't remember. So I was actually going to go set the trash out before coming with you. I said, well, I'm going to talk with Mike first, and then I'll set the trash out. Hopefully, Farmington Hills and my neighborhood will honor Dr. King and not pick up the trash until tomorrow. But you are correct. You are right that we should, none of us should trivialize the importance of what Dr. King meant, not just for African Americans, but for this nation. President Biden, and I'm saying president now because he'll be inaugurated in 2 more days. When he announced his running, he said, I'm running to redeem the soul of America. Dr. King used that same language. Dr. King talked about the soul of America. He talked about the fact that America had become bankrupt morally, spiritually. And Dr. King, as a preacher, as a moral person, he said, we must raise the stakes. We must allow America to restore her soul, to fight for her freedom and everything. And so Dr. King was not just for Black folk, he was for America. He was to restore the soul of America, just as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are seeking to do when they become president and vice president elect.
So today, we're looking as we enter this time now and celebrate this holiday today. Not only is it different because of the pandemic, we often walk on Orchard Lake Road in March, or we gather together in different celebrations and teachings throughout the day. Obviously, some of it's happening remotely on Zoom and different platforms, but we're not able to be together. But it's also in light of these past 6 months of what happened this summer from Memorial Day on, from the murder of George Floyd, and what we witnessed in this country, and the reckoning that we're coming to terms with, some of us.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you speak about what this day means in that terms, and what we're seeing, and how we find hope in the midst of this, despair of the same thing happening again?
Mike, I'm glad you raised that because what happened in the summer was a rude reminder that we're still not totally free when it comes to Blacks in America and systemic racism, that racism is still alive and well. But also what happened on January 6th at the United States Capitol ties that together, even with our Jewish brothers and sisters. When you see someone marching with a Camp Auschwitz shirt on, and you hearing people talking against our Jewish brothers and sisters as well, it shows that our two histories and our two peoples are still connected and interconnected and interwoven. Those folk that marched in the streets during the summer, and those of us that participated, we were marching and protesting because a black man, George Floyd, another black man, Ahmaud Arbery, a black woman, Breonna Taylor, black people were killed innocently, no reason. Ahmaud Arbery was shot down, gunned down, tracked down, hunted down just like a dog, and then cornered and then shot and killed. So black folk then, the Black Lives Matter movement, was marching and protesting because of an injustice, because of murder, because of things that's happening against black folk. But then what happened on January 6th was not about an injustice, about a murder. It was all based upon a lie that Donald Trump and his cohorts and followers are still promoting, that the election was not fair, it was not right, that it was stolen from them. And then they whipped these people up into a frenzy. And so you brought together white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis. You brought together all these hate groups who have supported Donald Trump down through the years. So what happened on January 6th was not new. It was just to pull the covers back to let everyone know that Donald Trump and many others around him continue to stand for injustice, racism, anti-Semitism, and violence. And they tried to flip it and say Black Lives Matter was violent. Black Lives Matter was focusing on changing a system of racism in the police department, changing a system of injustice in the criminal justice system, changing a system where black folk will matter. That we're not saying all lives don't matter, but we're talking about Black Lives Matter because Black lives are the ones that's being shot down and killed. Now what happened on January 6th, you can see that if Dr. King were here, Dr. King would speak out and he would talk about all of the things that have happened back in the 50s, the 60s, even now in 2020. And some say, well, don't call out the names. Dr. King called out the name of George Wallace. He called out the name of Bull Connor. He called out the name of Sheriff Jim Clark. He called out names and talked about the fact that we have to work together to end racism. So what happened during the summer Black Lives Matter movement and also January 6th, it shows that we need people such as yourself, a rabbi, such as myself, but then such as the young people who could come together and connect with each other and show that we still must work together. Black and white, Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, we still must work together in order to make America the place that America should be, and not keep saying, this is not who we are. This is exactly who we are. We don't want to admit it, but this is exactly who we are. And that's why we have to fight to change it and change those structures and those systems and ask people to follow in the footsteps of Dr. King, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, because on that same day, and I know I'm preaching, but when Raphael Warnock, a black man who pastors Ebenezer Baptist Church, Dr. King's church in Atlanta, and John Ossoff, a Jewish man, were elected to the United States Senate on the same day. That gives me hope that you could take a black man and a Jewish man, both elected, both made history on January 6th and 7th by being elected as the first black, the first Jewish person in Georgia, the state of Georgia, to the U.S. Senate. So I have hope. I have hope. I know Raphael Warnock very well. He's my Morehouse brother. He's my friend. I'm looking forward to meeting Senator-elect John Ossoff, and I'm looking forward to all of us working together with Raphael Warnock, John Ossoff, and us building bridges together.
I'm all part of it. Count me in.
Yes.
I agree. That was a hopeful day in the midst of the shock of what we witnessed. Though,
Yes.
like you said, it shouldn't have been a shock. It just pulled back
Yes.
the covers of what
Yes.
was, really already happening in our world, and the recognition of what's been fermenting there for quite some time.
Yes.
And the challenges around that. I think part of this, for me, is a recognition of our history. Like you said, it's always been there. It's a
Yeah.
recognition of our history, which isn't necessarily our fault, but doesn't mean we should be complacent about accepting it and saying it was okay. Like,
Yes.
just because something happened in my grandparents' generation or my parents' generation, and they weren't a part of it, but it's not a reflection on me unless I perpetuate it and continue it.
Exactly.
And that's
Exactly.
where it was Brian Stevenson who taught. I heard him speak, and he talked about he talks about this in his book Just Mercy as well, about what Nazi Germany, after Germany came back and became a democracy, and how they recognized the atrocities of the Nazi regime, and how in front of homes where Jews were taken from and sent to a death
Yes.
camp, there are bricks in the ground that have the family's name and says when they were removed, when they were murdered, right? And it doesn't deny that, as opposed to having statues celebrating Nazi heroes, which isn't allowed, unlike
Right.
in our country right now, right? Which we
Exactly.
still have that challenge. And it's Isabel Wilkerson in her book Caste, which I've been reading, and she talks about the house that we buy that might be 50 years old. There's a problem with the wood beams in there that have become a little bit rotted. It's not my fault that they're rotted, but I'm responsible for replacing them and fixing them,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I'm proud to say the Central Conference of American Rabbis has her as our keynote speaker at our conference in March, Isabel Wilkerson, to talk
Mm.
about racism in America and the challenges and our responsibility as Jews in working to eradicate that too.
Yes. I
Um,
think I think it's important. I know the time is spent. I know we're out of time,
oh,
but
it's great.
I
Who cares?
but I like what you just stated, because so many times when I've had discussions with my white liberal friends, or even some of my Jewish friends, who would tell me, well, that happened way back when. I had nothing to do with that. That's not my responsibility. That's not my. But what you said is key. It does not mean that you're a bad person because you have ancestors who may have been slave owners, or you had ancestors who allowed it, or you had ancestors. It does not mean that. But as you stated, it does mean that we must recognize the history of what things have happened, and we must work together and take the responsibility to eradicate things. Those who don't know their history are destined to repeat it. And so we have to look at those things and realize that, no, I'm not saying that all white people are bad, or all whatever is bad. No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that this country was built on a lie, because they came here and pushed the Native Americans out. Then they built it with African labor brought here by enslaving people from Africa, bringing them here and making my ancestors work the land, build this country for free labor, not cheap labor, free labor. And then when we finally were set free, we were promised 40 acres and a mule to give us something back. We never get 40 acres and a mule, never get hardly anything. And so we started freedom in a deprived way and at an economic disadvantage, because we were set free and put out here with nothing, no financial resources to assist us. And Dr. King talks about this. Dr. King mentions that you set the slaves free, and yet you did not give them all what they needed. He talked about how we gave money to the Japanese Americans in terms of the internal. We talked about how we've given money to this group, money to that group, and yet we never gave those 40 acres and a mule to African Americans. And we were promised that and never received it. And since then, it has caused us to be operating at a disadvantage. So there's a lot of things we can talk about in terms of white privilege and economic disparities and economic issues that stem from slavery. But the key thing is, I think Dr. King would want us to know we must continue to build bridges of friendship and brotherhood across racial lines, across denominational lines and faith lines. And we must realize that just because I don't look like you or you don't look like me, that we're enemies. It just means that God has honored our diversity to bring us together in unity.
I completely agree. I'd end with a couple of Dr. King's quotes that I find so powerful. One that we may all have come here on different ships, but we're in
Yeah,
the same boat now, right? And the idea, like you said, your ancestors were brought here enslaved. My
yes,
ancestors may have been fleeing oppression to come here. Doesn't
yes,
matter. We're in the same boat, and we got to figure out a
exactly.
way to row together to get to our destination of
Yes,
really lifting everyone up. And the other one that I think is so poignant right now is that we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And the
Exactly.
idea that if we're friends, we cannot be silent in the midst of acknowledging the past and the challenges of the past and the oppressions of the past, and coming to terms with that so we can make it better in the future, and that we're not complicit, and that we eradicate the the white privilege, and
Yes.
recognize the challenge and the racism that exists, as well as knowing what we have to be doing in the future.
And
So
you know, two of that, since you're quoting Dr. King, there are two quotes that I like so much. One is that the true measure of a man, in this case, man or woman, is not where he stands in terms of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of crisis and challenge. And the other thing that Dr. King said is that the politician asked the question, is it popular? The opportunist asked the question, is it expedient? The cowardice asked the question, is it safe? But the moral man or woman always asks the question, is it right? And he says there comes a time when we must speak out, not because it is popular, not because it is expedient, not because it is safe, but we must speak out because it is right. And that's what I charge and call upon my brothers and sisters to do, is to always speak out because it is right. It may not always be popular. It may not always be expedient. It may not always be safe, but at least speak out because it is right. And God will bless us and God will strengthen us if we go forward.
amen. I
Amen.
think that is a good way for us to end right now. Like you said, we could go on for many hours together on this
Yes,
conversation, but I promise it's a kickstart to our week and just a way to begin everyone thinking about these things. Hey, listen, please, if you're watching, you're with us right now, honor Dr. King's legacy by doing something special today, whether it's reading, whether it's watching one of the films that are out, right now, whether it's
yes,
13 on Netflix, or Selma, with the things that recognize really the challenges that we still face, but also the power of his legacy and how
yes.
important it is for us to be a part of that. So thank you, Pastor. I so appreciate you being a part of this right now, and our friendship, and always our time together. So happy Dr. King Day.
Happy King Day, my friend and my brother. I love you. And to all my friends that share shalom, I love you all. I thank God for you all. And let's do this together in love and in peace and in nonviolence. I love you all. God bless.
Love you too. Thank you so much.
Amen.